So the next time you hear somebody say, you know what, just let the homeless people live their lives. They're not causing anybody harm. They're just doing their own thing. They're just living on the street. They're living on the sidewalk. They're living in the park. This is a podcast you want to remember and you want to bring up the next time somebody says something as ridiculous as that. Because what happened in a homeless encampment down in Salem, Oregon is horrific. And it's the reason people shouldn't be living on the side of busy roads or in parks or anywhere else that crazy stuff can happen to them. Salem police arrest 24-year-old man who they say drove into a homeless camp, killing 4 people. I know down in Portland, Oregon, I think they've had 28 pedestrians killed last year. And of those, like 18 or 19 were homeless people. I mean, it's a real thing. So this is just one of the many reasons shouldn't be letting people live in these environments that they are. And we're trying to, across the United States right now, the homeless encampments are being swept. So this is one of those reasons of why you don't let people live on the sides of streets, especially busy streets. I know down in California, they've gone on a rampage and also in Oregon of cleaning out like encampments next to the freeway or busy roads. But you got to take that a step further and you got to square this situation away. And I don't know what that's going to take, but it's not good. We let it go too far. And now we're trying to, put the genie back in the lantern. And it's going to take a lot of work if we ever do it. And unfortunately, I think a lot of the damage is done. And this is kind of just what we're living with. And it's going to be a real battle back and forth to see what we can do as far as getting the homeless folks back on track into housing, whatever that is, getting their lives back on track. I think for a lot of these folks, this is a lifestyle choice. That's what I see from a lot of this. This is a lifestyle choice. And they're choosing to live in environments where they know, hey, this is a hall pass. Get free stuff, hall pass, live wherever we want. But unfortunately, we're allowing them to get killed as well. It's what we're reading about today. If you're new here, welcome. My name is Sean Reynolds. I own a couple of real estate companies here in Seattle, Washington, and I read the news for reasonable people because reasonable people don't think it's reasonable to be living in a tent on the side of a busy road where you can get killed. They just don't. They just don't. We know that's a hard no-go. All right, let's get into this one. Salem police have arrested 24-year-old Enrique Rodriguez Jr., the driver who crashed into a homeless camp early Sunday morning, killing 4 people and injuring 2 others. Rodriguez was booked in Marion County Jail and is facing 14 criminal charges, including 4 counts of first-degree manslaughter and 6 counts of reckless endangerment. Man, just not a good scene, right? I mean, just makes you cringe. Police responded to the scene of the crash near Front and Division Street Northeast at about 2 a.m. Sunday morning. Police have said 2 people living in the camp died at the scene. 4 other people living in the homeless camp were transported to a hospital with life-threatening injuries, 2 of whom later died, police said. The driver of the car was also taken to the hospital. Investigators said Rodriguez was driving a 2-door sports coupe northbound on Front Street before the car left the roadway and crashed into the homeless camp, pinning 2 people beneath the car. Police said alcohol may have contributed to the crash. Really? You had a drunk driver? In one account, I read that the car literally launched into the air. So you got a guy who's under the influence, driving too fast, launches the car. Police have not identified the victims. On Sunday morning, evidence of the crash was strewn throughout the grassy area that sits between several trees and separates Front Street Northeast and a train track. Piece of a headlight and a section of a bumper rested on the ground near a white sweater and a tent. They were both splattered with blood. A tire skid mark could be seen in the grass. I mean, it doesn't take a genius to figure out, okay, human beings, cars driving quickly, possibly drunk drivers behind the wheel. It's not going to end well for the people in the tents, right? It's just not going to end well. I've talked about this before, but one of the few confirmed deaths, I think it was the only death at the original Woodstock, was a guy who was sleeping in a sleeping bag out in a field, and he got run over by a tractor that was picking up garbage and debris. I mean, how horrible is that? Human beings that are lying inert, asleep, mixing with big vehicles, that doesn't go well. And that's a lot of what people don't understand is so many of these encampments are near busy streets because the odds of them getting cleared out of there oftentimes are pretty minimal. Angelo Cabintoy, 61, said he was standing outside his tent at the camp when he saw a gray or silver sports car speed over the median on Front Street Northeast. Oh, yeah, here it is. The car became airborne, flying 2 or 3 feet off the ground before landing on the grass, crashing into at least 2 tents and hitting a tree, Cabintoy said. People living at the camp rushed to help those who had been struck during the chaotic scene, he said. About 9 people tried to lift away the car. This is a horrific, horrific event. And that's why I want you to remember, next time somebody says, the homeless people are just doing their own thing. They might be doing their own thing, but there are other influences out there that are not conducive to the long-term living status of said homeless people. You got other things to consider, right? It's crazy. About 9 people tried to lift away the car, which had pinned one woman against a tree. This just keeps getting worse. So you got 2 people underneath. You got a car pinned against a tree. He said a man who had been struck crawled out from underneath the car. I mean, what a scene of mayhem, right? 1 minute you're in your tent asleep. The next minute just outside or your tent has just been blown apart. You're underneath the car going, what in the F is going on? And that's literally this scene, like out of a terrible, terrible Hollywood movie, right? Cabintoy said he saw another man lying several feet away from the car near the train tracks and tried to go over to help him. He said the man was dead and his face had been disfigured by the crash. Another person who was killed in the crash was inside a tent, he said. I know they were dead by looking at them, said Cabintoy, who had been living in the camp for about 3 weeks. What do you say to that? I mean, that is a scene of horrific violence. And so when people tell you, they're going to be fine, they're just doing their own thing. Okay, that's not the point, is it? That's not the point. And that's why I think a lot of folks, the homeless advocates who want to just let them live wherever, that's one of those things where they're like, okay, yeah. So if you read this story to them, what's their response going to be? Well, that's a very small percentage of the homeless that are impacted like this. Well, how about the 19 people in Portland who are no longer with us because they got killed in some kind of street environment, whatever it was, because people living in environments where you've got fast moving traffic or even slow moving traffic, it doesn't take much, does it? I mean, you run over somebody at a very slow speed. Yeah, it's going to leave a mark, right? It's going to leave a mark. So these people, they didn't stand a chance. They just didn't stand a chance. They got taken out. And I place some blame on the city. There's some liability on the city. You let people live there knowing full well, that pavement with those marks down the middle and, the sidewalks on the side, that whole concept, street lights, cars go there. Tents on the side shouldn't be there. So whether you need to figure out other places for the homeless to live because that's more conducive, I don't know. We've tried that. I think in Seattle right now, we've got a lot, an RV lot that is going to be opened. And the issue with that is we've tried that before and it became such a crime riddled area that they shut it down. The city shut it down. They're like, oh, geez. Yeah, that wasn't our intent. We just wanted to have a place where people could park their RVs, who are living in their RVs. It's their form of their home. And I get that. I understand that. That's kind of that stepping stone from house, RV, if you've got one, to tent. And so I do understand that. However, it seems like the solutions that we come up with, which is, all right, let's put them all together in this lot. We've tried that out before, and I know multiple other cities have tried that as well. So I don't know what the solution is here, But I do know people living in tents, along a busy arterial. I drive in Seattle, and so often I am shocked. Or drive down to Portland. I had friends who text me, God, and these are not people that necessarily listen to my podcast. Believe it or not, my friends don't all. Very few of them listen to my podcast because it's like, it's Sean. He's just babbling on a podcast. He doesn't know what he's talking about. It's just Sean. So, I'll have these conversations and somebody will text me, geez, just drove through downtown Portland. It's horrible. Tents everywhere. And this is not from somebody that, is familiar with the situation. And driving on the freeway, oftentimes in Seattle, I am like, man, I cannot believe they let somebody live there. I mean, it's just so apparent. I'm driving by at 70 miles an hour or whatever it is I'm driving. And, I'm driving and I'm trying to look because I'm always trying to figure out what's going on where. Oh, that's a new tent. All right. That's a new encampment underneath that overpass, because I want to know in my head, all right, here's where things started in downtown. They're expanding out. This is what it looks like. So I always try and pay attention to what's going on around my surroundings, because then I can have this talk with you and we can talk about it. What I find so interesting is that I'm, driving through downtown Seattle or wherever through a freeway. I'm driving like 70 miles an hour, and there will be a tent on this, not necessarily right on the side of the freeway. They don't have that, but on the hillside, maybe there's a barricade and there's a hillside. You'll see that a lot. You'll see like tree forts and stuff. I mean, it's insane what we've let go. I know was there a cabin down in Portland, somewhere Oregon-ish? I mean, it was like a serious structure. It had framing, it had a roof, it had all that good stuff. And people were just building it on the side of the road. And so one of those things that always comes up is, they're not harming anybody. Well, no, maybe they're not harming anybody. Let's just say they're not, for kick's sake, even though we know that a lot of the activity that goes on in the homeless encampments, you wouldn't stand for it in your house. I don't stand for it in my house. Why are we letting it go on public property? Well, because, that's just what we're doing in these liberal cities. That's just what we're doing. Let's just say for kicks that they are not harming people in their tent in the homeless encampment. And there are some folks who, that is the case. But it's not what they're doing. It's what can happen to them in these environments. That's my point of today's podcast and this story. I mean, what I just read to you. Could you imagine waking up and, oh my God, there's a car on top of me? I guess I get, let's see, what time you're underneath a car. And it's probably doesn't have is two-door sports coupe, right? So those aren't exactly lifted like a 4x4. So you got minimal clearance. You're going to wake up from your slumber. It's the middle of the morning, and you're going to, crawl out from underneath the car. There's a nice way to say good morning. And then you get out there and there's a woman trapped against the tree, and you got, clothes and just tents and debris and other dead people. I mean, that is literally like a horror film. You're waking up to your own horror film in a homeless encampment on the side of a road because a drunk driver, launched their car and clipped your encampment and just boom. So next time somebody says, I just let them live there, you can bring up this podcast, because I think this illustrates quite clearly. And I don't usually bring up like these specific things because, it's poverty porn, right? You've heard that term. It just kind of came into my vocabulary. You've got poverty porn, and I don't really want to focus on that. But if there is a specific reason why a story should be read, and I believe this one should be read because there is a real factor out there of why we don't want to let our fellow human beings live in a tent on the side of the road where busy traffic flow goes, because that's how traffic goes. That's how living, unfortunately, goes. You may lose your life, and that is, it's avoidable. It's avoidable. Don't have people live there. All right. But that's not what we're doing right now. But I've done a lot of podcasts recently where we're talking about things starting to go back to in tiny little steps and in tiny little directions of trying to get some sense of, being normal. And a lot of the cities that are cleaning out encampments on busy streets, you'll read that. That's where they start oftentimes, because you've got all these interactions going on and there's a higher propensity for people getting hurt in the encampments and just the craziness that goes on. So this is one of those stories where, hey, here's a pretty good example of why we don't let our fellow human beings just live willy-nilly just because, they don't want to deal with what, the rest of society says, which is, hey, you shouldn't be living there. You either need to be in, a shelter or getting some help somewhere else. You can't just post up anywhere. But in a city like Seattle, we have allowed that. Salem has allowed that. Portland has allowed that. San Francisco has allowed that. And now we've got that pushback, a little bit of tiny pushback. And it is not going to be an easy task to start to change some of these things because people on the encampments have gotten used to just doing their thing. And now they're getting swept out and they're like, oh, hey, what's the deal here? I mean, we're getting kicked around. You probably shouldn't be allowed to live where you've been living, in the first place. But then we had that whole CDC thing. And that's kind of how we got here in a lot of these encampments. They just were allowed to do their own thing because you couldn't sweep them from the CDC. Here we are. Now 4 people are dead. So, yeah, not a very happy, uplifting podcast here today, but one that I think is necessary. I mean, you've got these images of somebody pinned up against a tree. Horrific. That's somebody's kid. That was somebody's kid at some point. It's an adult now. That's not good. That's not the general direction we want to be heading here. And, yeah. So when you see and hear of encampments being cleared out on busy roads, this is one of those reasons as to why. And I didn't know a lot of these stats before I started covering these. And then, I've had people say, well, they're not harming anybody. No, but they might be harmed, and they might be more than harmed. They might cease to exist here on Earth. And again, those are our fellow human beings that were just like, whatever. Crazy times, right? Crazy times. So that's it for me on this one. Sorry for the Debbie Downer podcast, but it was one that needed to be done. And it's one of those ones where I will point back to this as a reference point because this is one of those examples. Again, yeah, this is totally unreasonable. Thanks for being here. We'll catch up soon. Talk then. Bye for now.